Alois Brunner remains one of the principal unpunished Nazi criminals, a stain on our history.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we'll be discussing individuals that were accused or convicted of crimes, yet ultimately managed to avoid proper, fitting punishment.
The world's most notorious Nazi fugitive would never answer for his crimes.
Sándor Képíró. The business of hunting down Nazis and their former collaborators is a complicated one, with lots of moving parts that don't always land in simple patterns.
The accused war criminal, aged 96, is the target of Nazi hunters worldwide.
Sándor Képíró was ultimately found not guilty in his native Hungary, in the face of allegations that he took an active part in the killing of civilians during World War II.
The former police captain is charged with personally ordering the execution of 36 people in a Hungarian raid on Novi Sad, a Serbian city then occupied by Hungary.
Képíró's admission that he was part of the roundup efforts ultimately wasn't enough for the accusations of war crimes to stick, despite efforts to the contrary by Efraim Zoroff of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. The latter remained unrepentant in the wake of Képíró's death in 2011, celebrating in a Facebook post about how the trial negatively affected Képíró's health. Léon Degrelle. The Rexist Party was founded by the Belgian politician and Nazi collaborator Léon Degrelle in 1935, a far-right organization that ran parallel to Germany's Nazi ideologies.
Léon Degrelle was also a Belgian fascist, and he fell in love with Nazi Germany.
Degrelle was sentenced to death by his own country for fighting alongside German forces in the Walloon Legion, but fled to fascist Spain in order to escape his fate.
In the end, it was typical Degrelle. He requisitioned a Heinkel bomber and took off for Spain, the last friend of fascism in Europe.
Léon Degrelle was unapologetic in exile and continued to actively work within the sectors of Holocaust denial and neo-Nazi support. Meanwhile, Degrelle's personal life was one of financial success and comfort, thanks to a lucrative construction business that funded his endeavors until his death in 1994.
In the end, Léon Degrelle died aged 87 in 1994 in Malaga, Spain.
Ante Pavelić. The Ustaše was yet another example of rising fascist sentiment in the years leading up to the Second World War.
At the time, Croatia was an ally of the Nazis, and its leader, Ante Pavelić, modeled himself on Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini.
Ante Pavelić was the leader of the Ustaše, founded in fascist Italy after Pavelić departed his native Croatia back in 1929. Pavelić and the Ustaše were accused not only of plotting multiple political assassinations, but also of the systematic executions of Serbs and Jews within Croatia's puppet state concentration camps.
Pavelić's regime was staunchly Roman Catholic, and Pavelić wanted to create an exclusively Catholic state and cleanse his native land of all alien elements.
Ante Pavelić spent his post-Ustaše years on the run, receiving assistance from the Vatican for an escape to Argentina. He remained firmly unrepentant through it all and was never brought to trial for his crimes. Although an assassination attempt did eventually lead to Ante Pavelić's death in Francoist Spain in 1959.
A year later, Pavelić was murdered, the victim of an assassin.
László Csatáry. It's common for those accused war criminals who are elderly to pass away while awaiting the results of their trials.
A man who was once the world's most wanted Nazi war crime suspect has died in Hungary while waiting to go on trial.
László Csatáry was actually sentenced to death by a Czech court for allegedly taking an active part in brutal camp deportation efforts during World War II.
And he was actually sentenced by a Czechoslovak court in 1948 to death himself for those crimes, but he escaped.
He fled to Canada and successfully avoided capture until efforts from the Simon Wiesenthal Center saw Csatáry being held under house arrest while new charges were being filed. Csatáry's Canadian citizenship was revoked, but his trial eventually came to an end after this former Hungarian officer died while awaiting trial.
Now, László Csatáry has always denied the crimes that he was accused of, but he is also a man who never hid his anti-Semitism.
Gustav Wagner. He was known as both the Beast and the Wolf during his tenure at the SS.
People like Wagner, who were introduced into this murder machine, were tested. Wagner passed the test.
He was a good student.
It was during this service where Wagner was accused of overseeing the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Jews in the Sobibor death camps. Wagner's life after World War II is spent in exile, living in Brazil, until he was discovered by noted Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal.
Wiesenthal makes an announcement to the world that one particular man in that photograph is Gustav Wagner, the wanted murderer from Sobibor, and he should be arrested.
It's been surmised that one of the survivors from Sobibor, Stanisław Schmeisner, was responsible for the knife that was found lodged in Wagner's chest at the time of his death in 1980. The official cause of his death, however, is listed as self-destruction.
One theory about how Wagner was killed was that maybe it had been a vengeful survivor who had done so, maybe someone who had survived Sobibor.
Ludolf von Alvensleben. This SS officer was never even properly put on trial, despite indictments being levied at his feet. Soldiers under the command of von Alvensleben were accused of being responsible for the deaths of thousands of Polish nationals. He escaped from the custody of British officials in 1945 and fled to a fascist haven in Argentina. Von Alvensleben was sentenced to death by a Polish court in absentia, but this mattered little when he was already living a new life abroad. Ludolf von Alvensleben died without ever paying the price for the atrocities that occurred under his watch. Aribert Heim. Historical horror stories have long been told about the inconceivable medical experiments conducted during World War II.
Aribert Heim carried out nearly 300 operations during which inmates often died in atrocious pain. The operations were barbaric.
Aribert Heim was an Austrian medical professional, we hesitate to use the word doctor, who was accused of torturing captives who were being held in Austria's Mauthausen-Gusen concentration camp.
Aribert Heim only stayed at Mauthausen for 6 weeks, but his cruelty would mark those who survived the camp forever.
This real-life Dr. Death was taken into custody by U.S. soldiers in 1945, but clerical alterations to his files resulted in Heim escaping prosecution. Heim continued to live life on the run as authorities attempted to bring him to justice, living in Egypt until finally being declared legally dead in 1992.
Aribert Heim finally succumbed to his illness on the 10th of August 1992, without ever having been arrested by the police.
Walter Rauff. If one needed any further proof how evil never truly dies, then all it might take is a viewing of Walter Rauff's public funeral from 1984.
In a bold gesture of defiance, Walter Rauff's German comrades, in true Nazi fashion, openly saluted him at his funeral in Santiago.
That's because this reprehensible Nazi commander was responsible for carrying out Germany's systematic orders against the Jewish people, particularly between the years 1942 and 1943.
Rauff had every reason to hide.
Rauff died in Chile after a post-war life that included protection by a Nazi sympathetic Catholic bishop in Italy, as well as working as an advisor for Syrian intelligence. Walter Rauff's Chilean funeral featured a number of unrepentant Nazi visitors, some of whom saluted and uttered vile anti-Semitic maxims before Rauff's coffin. Alois Brunner. This SS captain holds the ignoble distinction of being one of the architects of the Holocaust, a historical villain that tragically escaped paying the ultimate price for his sins.
Brunner's mission was simple: to revive the final solution.
Alois Brunner's name was similar to another Axis prisoner, and he took advantage of the mistaken identity to escape custody.
Hiding behind a false identity, Brunner returned to an ordinary civilian life without a worry in the world about his criminal past.
He even worked for the United States military under a false name before fleeing abroad. Brunner lived for a long time in Syria, and it was during this time when multiple attempts on his life via letter bomb cost Brunner some appendages. 2 separate death sentences in absentia couldn't bring Alois Brunner to justice. He allegedly died in Syria around 2010.
Justice never caught up with Brunner, except for the inconvenience of a few letter bombs.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Josef Mengele. He's on a short and vile list of history's most infamous war criminals.
Mengele was known as the Angel of Death. He wanted to improve the stock of the Aryan race.
An angel of death whose experiments on the captives of the Auschwitz II Birkenau were truly the stuff of nightmares. Yet Josef Mengele apparently died while swimming away from courts, trials, and more importantly, the face of justice.
That led the Germans to believe that Mengele had died in Brazil in 1979.
Mengele lived in Brazil after falsifying his identity while in custody of the American Allies. Josef Mengele eventually made his escape using what were known as Ratlines. These were social and travel networks that connected fascist war criminals with foreign sympathizers in order to scurry away from the scales of justice.
If you're looking for shards of justice in all of this, he didn't lead the life that many fantasized he did. This was not a comfortable life.
Which one of these failures of justice infuriates you the most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.